Welcome to my history channel. This video might be long, but if you stay until the end, you may finally understand the true nature of Italy's rise, collapse, and rebirth. How could a civilization that once ruled 3 continents become a nation known for losing wars, yet still shape the way the world lives today? The answer requires us to examine deep historical contradictions. Chapter 1. The Birth of Rome and the Logic of Power. To comprehend the soul of modern Italy, we must journey back to the 8th century before Christ. Along the muddy banks of the Tiber River, a humble settlement emerged surrounded by powerful neighbors. The early inhabitants were surrounded by advanced Etruscan and Greek civilizations. Through relentless struggle and strategic adaptation, this tiny village forged a formidable identity based on strict discipline and unyielding survival instincts. The early Roman mind was forged in the fires of paranoia and constant threat. Living under the shadow of the Etruscan kings, the Romans developed a deep psychological need for absolute control. This fear translated into a harsh cultural framework where weakness was systematically eradicated. To survive in a predatory world, they believed they had to become the ultimate predators themselves. Every Roman citizen was bound by a sacred civic contract that demanded ultimate sacrifice. The fields were plowed in times of peace, but the very same iron was sharpened into deadly swords when the Senate declared war. This dual identity created a resilient population capable of enduring tremendous hardships. The individual will was completely subsumed beneath the towering needs of the state. As they defeated rival tribes across the Italian peninsula, they did not merely annihilate their opponents. They implemented an ingenious political strategy by offering citizenship and legal protection in exchange for absolute loyalty and military taxes. This assimilation process transformed former blood enemies into vital components of the rapidly growing Roman military machine, ensuring a constant supply of fresh human capital. By establishing standardized tactics and unified equipment, the Roman military machine became an unstoppable force. They replaced chaos with rigid order, processing warfare with the precision of a transnational corporation. The supreme ambition of empire replaced the desire for survival. As they dominated the Mediterranean, they proved that absolute power always contains the hidden seeds of its own inevitable destruction. Chapter 2. The Engineering of Empire and Systematic Expansion. The phenomenal expansion of the Roman Empire represented a masterclass in human engineering. At its absolute peak, the empire controlled over 50 million people across 3 massive continents. This astonishing feat was not achieved merely through the edge of a bloody sword. It was sustained through the relentless application of law, standardized administration, and the unmatched prowess of monumental Roman infrastructure. The Roman legion operated as a terrifying masterpiece of human logistics and deadly precision. When marching through hostile wilderness, they constructed heavily fortified camps every single night without exception. This relentless discipline ensured that they were never caught off guard by sudden ambush. The enemy was defeated mentally by the sheer, mechanical inevitability of the approaching Roman forces long before actual combat. Architectural marvels served as powerful psychological weapons designed to crush the spirit of conquered peoples. When a barbarian chief walked into a provincial Roman city and witnessed massive stone amphitheaters and soaring columns, his will to resist instantly crumbled. The architecture whispered, a clear message that the Roman Empire was an eternal force of nature that could never be undone by mere mortals. However, the tremendous influx of slaves and plundered wealth began, poisoning the cultural roots of the Republic. Small independent farmers were systematically replaced by massive agricultural estates run entirely by enslaved captives. The proud Roman citizen suddenly found himself unemployed and disenfranchised, forced to rely on the free grain distributions provided by ambitious politicians seeking to buy ultimate power and influence. When a civilization replaces its founding ideals with the hollow pursuit of endless luxury, the psychological core begins to rot. The grand temples continued to shine brilliantly under the Mediterranean sun, but the spiritual foundation had already fractured. The illusion of eternal glory prevents a dying empire from recognizing the fatal structural weaknesses spreading silently through its vast and unmanageable territories. Chapter 3: The Internal Decay and Collapse of Rome. The decline of the Roman Empire did not happen overnight through a sudden foreign invasion. It was a gradual and agonizing process of internal rot and systemic abandonment. The citizen soldiers were slowly replaced by foreign mercenaries who fought exclusively for financial compensation rather than national pride. When the defenders of a civilization share no spiritual connection to it, defeat becomes mathematically inevitable. The severance of the empire into two distinct administrative zones marked the beginning of a fatal psychological divorce. The wealthy eastern half, centered around Constantinople, effectively abandoned the increasingly impoverished western territories. The once magnificent city of Rome was slowly deprived of crucial economic resources and necessary military reinforcements, leaving it dangerously exposed to the approaching storm gathering on the northern horizons. Inside the decaying cities, a bizarre cultural blindness infected the ruling aristocracy. As the economy systematically collapsed and the peasantry starved in the gutters, the elites continued to host lavish banquets inside their luxurious palaces. They convinced themselves that the eternal city could never truly fall, shielding their fragile minds from the terrifying geopolitical reality, slowly enveloping their entire doomed civilization. When the desperate Germanic tribes finally breached the defenses, they did not face the fearsome legions of the past. They encountered an exhausted, demoralized population that felt no intense loyalty to a corrupt government that had long ago abandoned them. The barbarians simply walked into a decaying vacuum, claiming the crumbling jewels of an empire that had already committed slow institutional suicide. The fall of Rome teaches us that military supremacy and economic wealth offer no permanent protection. When a society loses its collective purpose and abandons civic duty for selfish indulgence, it becomes a fragile shell. True power cannot be sustained through force alone. It requires a unifying belief, for without it, even the greatest empire ultimately returns to the dust. Chapter 4: Fragmentation and the Chaos of City-States. Following the total collapse of imperial authority, the Italian peninsula shattered into countless fragmented territories. For over 1,000 years, endless warfare plagued the region as local warlords, foreign kings, and ambitious popes battled for supreme control. No single entity possessed the ultimate strength to unify the land, resulting in a perpetual state of violent chaos and deep political instability. The unique geography of the Italian peninsula played a crucial role in preventing any future centralized rebuilding. The imposing Apennine Mountains physically divided the land, creating natural fortresses where isolated city-states could autonomously flourish. Without a dominant geographic center capable of forcing compliance, the regions naturally evolved into fiercely independent political entities, with their own unique dialects, customs, and fierce rivalries. Into this power vacuum stepped the Catholic Church, claiming both spiritual authority and temporal dominance. The papacy, in Rome, deliberately encouraged political fragmentation to ensure that no single secular king could ever threaten their ultimate supremacy. They masterfully played rival cities against one another, ensuring that the Italian peninsula remained a perpetual chessboard saturated with endless warfare and treacherous diplomatic maneuvering. Amidst the endless bloodshed, a revolutionary class of astute merchants emerged from the shadows. They recognized that waging expensive wars over small plots of rocky land was an utterly foolish economic strategy. Instead, they turned their gaze toward the vast horizons of the sea, realizing that true power derived from controlling the highly lucrative supply chains connecting Europe with the mysterious East. This pragmatic shift demonstrated that a broken people could still dominate the world through commercial brilliance. Wealth generated through trade allowed these cities to protect themselves using paid mercenaries, while their citizens focused on production. When a society realizes that true power lies in creation rather than destruction, it sets the ultimate stage for a glorious cultural awakening. Chapter 5: The Renaissance and the Rise of Human Value. The accumulation of massive wealth within the independent city-states created an unprecedented environment for cultural explosions. Powerful banking dynasties, like the Medici family in Florence, began funneling astonishing amounts of capital into artistic patronage. They understood that magnificent art and monumental architecture projected true political power much more effectively than maintaining expensive and unreliable armies on the chaotic battlefield. The Medici family epitomized this radical transformation from military brutality to financial sophistication. By inventing complex accounting systems and letters of credit, they managed to control the treasuries of kings and popes across the entire continent. They weaponized their tremendous financial capital to shape political outcomes, proving that a clever banker could exercise significantly more influence than a heavily armored general. To legitimize their acquired wealth, these elite families poured fortunes into sponsoring unprecedented artistic endeavors. They commissioned breathtaking frescoes and towering marble statues that glorified the human form in ways unseen since antiquity. This cultural arms race between rival cities created a phenomenal environment where intellectual curiosity was rewarded, and absolute creative genius was elevated to a near-divine social status. This philosophical earthquake reshaped the inner psychology of the Italian citizen. The medieval mindset, which viewed human existence as a miserable waiting room for the afterlife, was completely destroyed. The Renaissance declared that man was the measure of all things, capable of understanding the complex universe. Through rigorous observation, scientific inquiry, and the relentless pursuit of unfiltered physical and intellectual beauty, the Renaissance permanently encoded a deep preference for individual autonomy over rigid collective obedience within the Italian soul. This beautiful obsession with humanity produced the greatest cultural output in history, yet simultaneously handicapped their future military effectiveness. A civilization cannot worship both the sword and the canvas equally, for the pursuit of beauty inevitably erodes the brutal discipline required for domination. Chapter 6: The Failure of Unity and the Weakness of Collective Identity. The Italian peninsula remained divided for centuries, while other European nations consolidated into powerful unified states. It was not until the year 1870 that Italy finally achieved formal political unification. However, drawing lines on a map does not automatically forge a cohesive nation. The new country immediately faced severe internal contradictions and a profound lack of genuine shared identity. When political unification was finally declared in 1870, the celebrations were confined exclusively to the northern elite. The Prime Minister famously declared that having made Italy, they now had to make Italians. This chilling statement highlighted the terrifying reality that the new nation was merely a legal fiction, lacking any genuine emotional cohesion or shared historical destiny among its diverse citizens. Linguistic barriers served as impenetrable walls dividing the newly unified population. Citizens from Venice could barely understand the spoken dialects of their fellow countrymen in Sicily. Without a unified language to transmit a cohesive national narrative, the government attempted to impose a standardized culture through rigid state education. However, the vast illiterate peasantry viewed these external mandates with deep suspicion and overt hostility. The economic integration process resembled a brutal internal colonization rather than a joyful national reunion. The industrialized North systematically exploited the agricultural South, draining its capital and resources to fuel northern factories. Millions of Southern Italians felt utterly betrayed by the central government, prompting massive waves of desperate emigration across the ocean in search of the basic dignity their own country denied them. The failure to construct a unified consciousness left Italy extremely vulnerable in the dangerous era of global imperialism. A nation cannot build a formidable global presence when its own citizens feel like strangers to one another within their own borders. Without a deep psychological foundation built on shared destiny, any attempt at military greatness will always inevitably end in humiliation. Chapter 7: Colonial Ambition and Strategic Misjudgment. In the late 19th century, European powers frantically scrambled to carve up the African continent, desperate to prove its status as a major global player. The newly unified Italy decided it also needed a glorious colonial empire, driven by misplaced ambition and a deep inferiority complex. The Italian government authorized reckless military expeditions into unforgiving and highly unfamiliar foreign territories. The newly formed Italian state gazed jealousy at Britain and France as they gobbled up immense territories across the globe. Fearing irrelevance on the international stage, Italian politicians convinced themselves that an overseas empire was an absolute prerequisite for genuine national respect. They desperately desired to sit at the elite table of great powers, regardless of their own severe domestic economic deficiencies. The crushing defeat at the Battle of Adwa triggered a violent psychological shockwave across the entire peninsula. The government attempted to suppress the humiliating news, but the streets quickly erupted into furious protests against the utter incompetence of the military leadership. This trauma imprinted a deep sense of inferiority within the national consciousness, creating a desperate thirst for eventual vengeance and global validation. When the fascist regime eventually secured the Ethiopian territory decades later, they encountered an economic nightmare. The local population remained deeply hostile, requiring a massive and expensive military presence to maintain basic order. The illusion of imperial profit was completely shattered as the Italian treasury hemorrhaged wealth, trying to modernize a barren landscape that consistently refused to yield any meaningful financial returns. When the Second World War erupted, the Allied forces swiftly expelled the Italian military from East Africa in 1941. Every ounce of blood spilled, and every lira invested evaporated instantly into the wind. The entire colonial endeavor demonstrated how blind ambition disconnected from pragmatic reality always transforms a desperate imperialist state into the architect of its own spectacular downfall. Chapter 8: World Wars and the Psychology of Surrender. Italy entered the 20th century riddled with strategic confusion and dangerous illusions of grandeur. During the First World War, the nation betrayed its original alliance and joined the Entente, hoping to secure substantial territorial gains. However, their military performance was plagued by incompetence, culminating in the disastrous rout at Caporetto, where hundreds of thousands of exhausted Italian soldiers fled the battlefield. During the First World War, millions of young Italian men were dragged from their quiet villages and thrown into the frozen meat grinder of the Alpine trenches. They suffered through horrific winter conditions, fighting desperate battles over meaningless patches of icy rock. The relentless carnage completely destroyed any lingering romantic illusions about the supposed glory of dying for the abstract national concept. When the global conflict concluded, the Allied powers conveniently ignored the secret treaties they had made with Italy. The promised territories were carelessly given to other nations, leaving the Italian public boiling with intense resentment. This profound sense of international betrayal destroyed their faith in democratic institutions, paving the dangerous path for demagogues who promised to violently restore their stolen imperial destiny. Throughout the Second World War, the Italian soldier was consistently placed in impossible situations by arrogant and disconnected commanders. Sent to freeze in the Russian snow without proper boots, or abandoned in the scorching African desert without functional artillery, the average trooper realized his life was considered worthless. The will to fight evaporated entirely when faced with such blatant institutional disregard for human survival. When a population values the simple beauty of daily existence over the abstract glory of global domination, military discipline rapidly dissolves. The swift surrenders saved countless lives and preserved historic infrastructure that would have otherwise been eradicated. By subconsciously rejecting the fanatical urge to fight to the bitter end, they paradoxically guaranteed the long-term survival of their own ancient civilization. Chapter 9: Post-War Recovery and the Power of Culture. Following the conclusion of the Second World War, Italy was a defeated nation, stripped of its colonies and burdened by debt. According to conventional historical logic, the country should have remained an impoverished and marginalized backwater for decades. Yet, against all probable odds, the nation experienced a miraculous economic resurrection from the 1950s through the 1970s. The introduction of American financial assistance through the Marshall Plan provided the crucial seed capital for this miraculous transformation. However, the Italians did not simply copy the dull mass production models of their generous benefactors. They injected their unique regional soul into every manufacturing process, ensuring that even the most basic industrial goods maintained a distinct and unmistakable aura of artisan craftsmanship. The brilliant creation of the Vespa scooter perfectly encapsulated this remarkable economic philosophy. It was designed as cheap transportation for a ruined nation, yet it was sculpted with such incredible elegance that it became an international icon of freedom and style. They transformed post-war poverty into high fashion, demonstrating an unmatched genius for turning bleak circumstances into highly desirable consumer art. This economic resurgence validated a way of life that radically defied the anxious trajectory of modern capitalism. While other nations measured success exclusively through relentless efficiency and endless corporate grind, the Italian paradigm maintained the supreme importance of the leisurely meal, the afternoon rest, and meaningful human interaction. They exported not just physical products, but a deeply seductive alternative reality of authentic joy. True national strength does not always require thousands of nuclear submarines or endless armored divisions. A country can exercise immense influence simply by convincing the rest of humanity that its specific way of living is the most desirable. By weaponizing beauty, taste, and heritage, the conquered nation transformed itself into an undisputed superpower of global lifestyle and timeless cultural aspiration. Chapter 10. A civilization that chose life over domination. The bizarre and fascinating trajectory of Italian history offers a profound lesson for modern humanity. This is the exact same geographical location that gave birth to the most formidable military machine in the ancient world. Yet, over the span of 2 millennia, the very same people deliberately shed the heavy armor of imperialism to embrace the gentle warmth of humanism. When we stare at the towering Colosseum in Rome, we are looking at a monument built by a civilization intoxicated by blood and total conquest. Yet, when we look at the people drinking coffee in the shadow of those ruins today, we see a society that has completely recovered from that dark illness. They have successfully deconstructed the poisonous concept of the warrior state. The modern Italian framework values the protection of the vulnerable much higher than the accumulation of geopolitical power. Their extensive public healthcare system ensures that no citizen faces financial ruin because of unexpected illness. Their strict labor protections guarantee that work remains a tool to support a beautiful life, rather than allowing the soulless economy to exploit the individual until premature death. Every military defeat they endured stripped away another layer of toxic ambition, pushing them closer to their authentic cultural core. They lost the vain struggles for global hegemony, but they unequivocally won the secret competition for the highest quality of human existence. They teach us that the relentless obsession with absolute power only leads to the graveyard of forgotten empires. History eventually forgets the names of ruthless generals, but it forever worships the creators of timeless beauty. If this deep exploration of Italian history has shifted your perspective, please like this video and subscribe to my history channel. I leave you with one final question to ponder. Would you rather live in a fearful empire that rules the world, or a peaceful nation that knows how to live?